This is a conversation that's probably long overdue. There's been about a half dozen times in the last year plus I've said to myself, I need to have Todd get this guy on, and then it always slips my mind. And then finally, over the weekend, I just remembered it again, and I texted you, I think it was like 6 a.m. or something, and I said, hey, before I forget this time again, we've got to get Andrew Bostom on the show. Researcher, epidemiologist, Brown University, has done some phenomenal work over the last year. Plus, used a lot of his own research to help me with some of mine as well. He joins us now here today on the program. And Andrew, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Long overdue, brother. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
We're going to dive deep into the COVID and vaccine data, but before we do, I want to go back to, well, you first wrote this book in 2008, The Legacy of Islamic Anti-Semitism. It was republished in 2020. We obviously just went through another round of Hamas or Iran versus Israel and the Iron Dome and missiles and counter missiles and charges and counter charges. As you watched all of this play out, and now we had roving mobs of Israeli citizens who are sympathetic with Palestinians committing acts of violence similar to what we've seen with BLM and Antifa here in our own country. As you watched this transpire over the last couple of weeks, given the amount of work and research you've done on this topic as well, just share some of your thoughts.
Well, I mean, I just think it's a manifestation of a phenomenon that, coincidentally, I had referred to right before the pandemic broke as the book was about to be released. And then, of course, the publicity had to be canceled. I had referred to what was going on at the time as a pandemic of Muslim anti-Semitism. And that was based really on polling data throughout the world that gave an indication of these attitudes. And the problem, Steve, and the reason I think it's been so intractable is because it's coming, we don't like to talk about, no one likes to talk about this. I don't like to talk about it. It's unfortunately coming from mainstream institutional Islam. It's not a marginal phenomenon, and certainly in terms of the doctrine. Obviously, it's up to Muslims how they'll interpret the doctrine, but the doctrine of really, both Quranic Jew hatred and Jew hatred from the traditions of Islam is being inculcated from mainstream Islamic institutions, the most prominent ones, particularly the Al-Azhar University. And so, for example, just recently, the current Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University, Ahmed Al-Tayeb, all he could talk about was the horrible outbreak of Zionist terrorism, as if there was no context and no jihad which precipitated it. And this is a man who's on record saying in 2013 that this Quranic verse, which is, I think, a central verse in terms of Quranic anti-Semitism, it's in the 5th surah chapter, the 82nd verse, which is kind of a psychological projection verse. It's that the Jews harbor the greatest enmity towards Islam, and therefore they have to be hated and debased, etc. He cited that in a very casual interview in 2013 as being the central tenet upon which Islam hinges its assessment of Jews, and how they've plagued Islam from the advent of Islam till now. And the fact that he could say this so matter-of-factly, there's nothing wrong with it theologically in terms of Islam, but that there's no pushback on this, Steve. Nowhere, no one. I mean, the one person who has ever called him out was Geert Wilders from the Netherlands, but no clerical figures in the United States, Jewish or Christian or Muslim, no political figures, and and he's made repeated statements along these lines. And his predecessor was even worse. His predecessor, who died in 2010, the former Grand Imam of Al-Azhar University, Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi, he wrote a tract called "The Jews and the Quran and the Traditions," which is a 700-page horrific treatise just glorifying the most vehement anti-Semitism in both the Quran and the traditions, as also defining the permanent relationship between Muslims and Jews. And you can find Shiite institutions, mainstream institutions in Iran, not the Khomeinists, not the Khameneists, that teach exactly the same theology. And I just don't hear anyone calling this out. And in fact, what Islam really needs is something akin to the Nostra Aetate Vatican II process, which was a mea culpa based process to discuss and truly reform some of the theology from Christianity that was anti-Semitic, that at least the Vatican acknowledged was. And I just don't see. I think we're light years away from that. Coming from Islam, and it's got to come from outside Islam. It's got to come from non-Muslims, and I don't hear non-Muslims talking about it.
Folks, if you want to see with your own eyes and hear with your own ears, do some of your own research, like Andrew does as a professional researcher. But if you want to itemize with your own eyes and ears what the phenomena he just talked about, if you have a Twitter account, you need to follow an account called Memri, MEMRI. It's how it's spelled, MEM, M as in Mary, EMRI. And all Memri does is just post clips unedited of what is said over the airwaves in the Islamic world. And if you just see this like casual conversation, like their versions of cable news shows, talk shows, debates, their version of afternoon, let's bring on the local celebrity, discuss, what's going on in their careers and their lives, their versions of these shows. Go watch these clips for yourself and just see how casual the references that Andrew is citing for you just comes across in their everyday vernacular. Memri is the account, MEMRI. And you'll see what he's talking about for yourself.